Hello, everyone. I believe that we are live and joining our very first session of Leadership Point of View. Oh, I can already see engagement on the chat. Hi, Dapo from the UK. And we have other people here also tuning in, I guess, from other countries. So feel free to introduce yourselves when you join the webinar. For now, a few rules of engagement to explain a little bit of where all the concept comes from. The idea is that a lot of the webinars that we see nowadays, they are quite heavy. They are like an hour and a half. Attention span is hard to keep up. So the idea is to bring thought-provoking ideas and concepts that are making waves in the workplace and in overall leadership talks. And we want to do this in a 25-minute bite-sized series. So the idea is always that we'll have a bit of an introduction, then we'll give the space to the different, speakers. In this case, Orsolya, which we know each other already for a while, and then it will be uninterrupted 10 to 15 minutes presentation on the point of view. And then we'll engage with the audience that is here for the engagement, for the questions, for the assessments, for insights. And then we wrap up and everyone will have access to the recording and can also afterwards figure out how to reach to each of us. We'll do that at the end. So having said this, today we have Orsolya Kovács. She's an associate director at BCG, Boston Consulting Group. With a heavy focus on preparing the workforce for the future. So she collaborates a lot with chief HR officers on planning, reskilling, HR transformation. And she was actually the lead author of the most recent BCG's Decoding Global Talent series, which analyzes work mobility trends. And her work was actually featured on Harvard Business Review, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, and she won a prize last year in 2023 for the Harvard Business Review for co-authoring the Reskilling in the Age of AI, which is one of the topics of today. So that is about that. And without further ado, with the people live, Orsolya, I give you the space to introduce yourself and let me know when you want to pull in the presentations so that you can share your insights with the audience that is present here.
Super. Well, thanks, Hugo, for having me. Very happy to be the first one on the Leadership Point of View series. Welcome, everyone. As Hugo mentioned, I work a lot with large companies, with the HR departments, and all kinds of aspects on preparing the workforce for the future. And my role is a dual role. So I work a lot with clients as a management consultant, but on the side, in my free time, of which there is not much, I do also research, which focuses on how people want to work and what kind of jobs will be available and how can we prepare people for those. And so today I will be speaking about what is our perspective on reskilling, how big is the reskilling challenge, why is it there, what can we do to solve it, and specifically we also talk about what is the role of leaders to think a bit differently about who is talent, who they consider as a possible employee in a world where people's jobs may be changing several times throughout their lives. Hugo, if you can get the slides up, let me know if it's already visible. Then I will first lead you through a quick presentation. As consultants, we need to have slides, but hopefully you will like them. And then we'll be available for discussion, looking forward for questions. Let me know if you can see it already.
It should be all good, yes.
All right, good. So first of all, why do we talk about talent? Why is this such an increasingly important issue? We also have more work. Last 10 years since I started my BCG career, more and more companies come to us recognizing that HR and talent needs to be a bit more professional. What you see here is a pretty interesting statistics. The lines show the growth of labor productivity. Labor productivity as defined by GDP per hours worked. And you can see that in the 60s, the speed of labor productivity growth was a lot faster. So, from one year to another, people would produce more with the same output, same amount of hours. However, this growth, there is still growth, but it's much, much smaller. It slowed down considerably, despite all of these technological improvements. And then, of course, Gen AI is still coming. We have to see what's going on with this. So what we can see is despite technological development, the growth of human productivity is actually not proportional. This is what is called Solo's paradox, who has stated it in the 90s, where he said, you can see the computer age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics. Now, of course, this is simplifying things, is macro data. Maybe your productivity improved, but is not in the GDP, but you produce better quality, or you are just healthier or happier. There are other ways to measure whether people's work has improved. But in general, technology has not improved productivity to the extent one would have expected. And talent is a major factor in that. Looking at another scientist, Gordon Moore, who said in the 60s that transistor count on a microchip will double every 2 years. Basically, the technological improvement will be exponential. If you compare to that how quickly humans learn, though, that is not exponentially improving. Now, people are debating whether Moore's law is still valid, but it more or less has held true. So basically, every couple of years, we have doubled the speed and half the cost of technology, of processing capacity. But the processing capacity of the human mind actually didn't change quite that much. Okay, we can do some online learning and download an app, but in the end, to really learn something, you need to practice, you need to shadow others, and so on. So we learn slower than how fast technology changes. So, and that's one of the reasons why on the previous slide, technology uptake is of course not as fast as technology development. So that means we will always have people who don't have quite the right skills because technology has disrupted them. However, this is not new, right? The fact that technology is displacing some jobs has been the case since, the horse drivers were not needed after the car was invented. What is different is the speed. So we end up with major imbalances on the labor force. We did a quick estimation based on different sources, what will happen to the labor force by 2030. There will always be around 30-40% who are not employed and inactive on the labor markets. That's pretty much the same ratio as today. These are people who are sick or not working for other reasons. There is usually this portion of the global workforce who is working age, but not working. But what will happen to the rest? You will have some who are unemployed looking for the job, and then those who are employed, a really, really large percent will need to upskill to stay competitive, which means, they may remain in the same job, but they need a broadly different set of skills, myself included. And around 20% of the overall workforce will need to reskill with jobs disappearing. Again, this is a summary of a lot of different studies that we've reviewed. There are different estimates and forecasts, but most analysis agrees that this current development of technology, especially with Gen AI, will really make a large share of jobs obsolete, and people will be in those jobs as it's happening. So what can we do about that? Well, the problem is, despite technological changing so fast, the way we build skills of the workforce hasn't really changed like the last 100 years or more. What you can see here is just a kind of schematic illustration. On the bottom is the age of a person, and on the vertical axis, it's kind of a theoretical expression of the value of your skills, as in how much your skills are in demand and competitive on the labor market. Now, just imagine the average person, first 20 years of your life, you basically spend stocking your skills. Most of the time you are in school, you are building a starting skill base. And then there comes the first problem. Already when you finish school, some of those skills are irrelevant. You can see a survey here where only 13% of employers think graduates have the right skills. But anyway, so you are 20, you spend most of your life learning, you have a starting skill set. Now, around 25 years ago, the half-life of skills was about 20-something years, which means that in 26 years, half of your skills would lose their value. So kind of the value of your skills is halving every 20-something years, which means if you didn't do anything, you would have lost the value of your skills, but not completely and not that fast. And also people used to retire at 60 or before, so it kind of was okay. However, latest estimates show that the half-life of skills is 5 years and less, especially in tech fields. So today, if you do nothing, the value of your skills will go like this gray graph. And really not that many people do enough to counter the depreciation of your skills. And what's making it worse, the retirement age is only going up. Now it's going up to 74 in certain OECD countries. So basically this attitude that we stock the skills and then we forget about them is completely unsustainable. Still, an average government invests 4.3% of GDP in the first phase of skill stocking. And how much do you think they invest in the second phase, the rest of 50 years? 0.1 to 0.2%. So we have a major discrepancy in how the resources are allocated today when it comes to education. And it's not only the government resources, but also how much we spend time on learning. You know, when we are students, we spend pretty much most of our time learning, and then an average hour spent by individual on learning is around 35 hours per year. So what can we do? Ideally, you know, a person's skill building path would look more like this, that already you get a better starting skill set due to education reform, then you continuously upskill, and several times in your life, you go through these larger shifts of reskilling to a completely new field. But this requires much more effort. And the problem is the existing skilling ecosystems can't really address this challenge on their own. Because you would say, okay, but we have training in companies, corporate learning, sure. But 70% of workers in the world, they work in small or middle-sized companies. Those companies don't even have HR sometimes. They don't have a training department. So corporate learning alone won't solve it. Academia, sure, you can do adult education. You can go back to academia in theory. There are executive courses, but generally academia is still not yet structures for millions or even billions of adults going back to school. Online education, yes, it's there, yes, it's helpful, but it's still not accessible to everyone. Completion rates are quite low, and also an online course is not likely to make you from a warehouse worker to a software developer. And government programs, the last thing, government tends to be too passive, skilling programs not scalable, or as you can see, governments underinvest. So something we've been studying with my colleagues and also with HBS together is how one can strengthen the collaboration, where basically companies need to act like academia, governments need to kind of be as active as governments are active for running pension systems or other parts of social security. Online education need to expand. So it's kind of all of this, they need to work together. Nearly the boundaries between them need to kind of disappear and form what we call kind of a more integrated skilling ecosystem. But today we'll talk a little bit more about companies and the role of leaders in how to support this transformation. We have also a ton of stuff, for example, on the role of government or how academia should change. One good news though, workers are ready to reskill. Quite often we talk about reskilling as something that's done to the workers. But actually, in this very large survey that I lead for several years now, we ask people, would you be willing to reskill to a completely different job? Sorry. And we always get a majority who say yes. And then a lot of people say, yes, if I had serious difficulties in my current role. So it's very few people who say, no, I'm going to stick with my role, even if I cannot find work anymore. And also most people are kind of quite smart about it. So in this survey, we asked a couple of other questions to people as well, such as what matters to you at the workplace or how much are you using Gen AI. And then we saw that those who actually have a stronger impact of Gen AI on their jobs are more ready to be open to reskill. And also those people who are worried about the security of their jobs also more ready to be reskilled. So basically workers, they're not stupid, right? They know the change is coming. They feel it and they are ready to act, but still they need help. And the biggest help from any leader that people need, that talent needs, who may not come from traditional backgrounds, is to just really change your mind about what talent is. Talent is not defined by the geography they are from, not defined by their education or experience, and definitely not defined by race, gender, or ethnicity. It should be defined by their skills and motivation. Now, this is not new. I think everybody knows this. What is the problem? The problem is that these things are measurable and you know them. While skills and motivation is much, much harder to judge. So naturally, leaders and managers often fall back on proxies they are familiar with. let me hire this guy from the same university I went to, because you are kind of sure what you're getting. If it comes to let's hire this other dude from a totally different country, university I never heard of, who thinks they have the same skills, you need to make much more effort to actually prove whether these people have the skills or not. And that's a whole other conversation. But of course, technology also helps now to test skills, to do like a trial period, to do even a virtual reality simulation. So it's getting easier to actually hire for skills, but it's still not that easy. But first of all, what is important is the mindset needs to be there to really challenge. Do you look at people similar to yourself as talent, or can you really look behind it? And that's what we studied with the HBS together. We wrote an article on reskilling in the age of AI, where we interviewed 40 companies on their experience in reskilling. And these are what we call the reskilling pioneers. But even these companies, they had not been able to crack yet reskilling people at scale. However, there are a couple of things we learned. Maybe I just do this a little faster and highlight a couple of things. Quite often reskilling, as in moving people, from one job that's disappearing to other job that's needed, is seen as a CSR or a PR initiative. Let's do something with those poor workers. What makes it more successful is we think about is it a key strategic initiative to unlock talent pool, especially in the age of aging population. We really need to leverage all the talent we have. And maybe a couple more I would highlight is reskilling is not an HR thing. It should be every leader and manager's responsibility. And very important, reskilling is not a training initiative. It's way more than that. It has so much change management behind. Just to give you an example, Amazon runs a program where they actually take the people from the warehouse, send them through a 1-2 year training, and at the end, they come out as software developers and they work in their software developing teams. But it's not about learning how to develop a software. Going from the warehouse to an office setting is also about how to behave, how to dress, what are the rules, how to collaborate in a team differently. There's much, much more when a person changes a career that needs to be addressed. And then finally, not to forget, employees want to reskill, but companies need to think of making a good offer. Why would you uproot your life and change your career? Because you get better career progress, you have a new job, you have basically a way to rebuild your life in a new way. And to explain that and to show that is also every leader and manager's responsibility. And I think I'll stop there for some questions. Happy to hear what you all thought.
Thanks, Orsolya. I think we have one question from David, but before we get into that one thing that I saw that was interesting was about the whole element of the companies and how they want to reskill, but what's stopping companies from making reskilling a core strategy? What have you seen in your studies that stops them from making that a bet?
So I think a couple of things. One is the upfront investment required, because of course you do need, usually the training budget that companies have is not enough for this. So it should come from something else, let's say a strategy transformation initiative and so on, to say, okay, we are taking now these 100 people in the customer service, we are taking them out of their day jobs first. That's also a problem. Putting them through, let's say, a year of training, and at the end, they are data analysts. Like, this is a really huge upfront investment, but actually there are many calculations that prove that this is still cheaper than hiring new people from the market and then letting go of your existing people. But anyway, so money is an issue. And the other issue is really the mindset, in which, for example, the managers who are receiving the data analysts that were customer service people before, maybe not so happy about it. Maybe they could say, oh, but give me a real one. So there is again a big manager mindset responsibility there.
Okay, and with the reskilling, I found interesting the willingness of people to reskill, but willingness is very different from ability. Yeah, I can be willing to become a software engineer, but the ability to become a software engineer is a different topic. Did you have a chance to see in those companies that actually try to reskill how many people were able to make the actual change?
That's interesting. So actually, just anecdotal evidence, but from most of the interviews, once people finished the course, then they actually had a pretty high ratio actually succeeding in the job. The problem was the dropout rate throughout the course. So I think there are a lot of people who may be excited at the beginning and then they realize this is harder than I expected, or this is not for me. So basically one needs to count with that as well.
Okay, thanks. Let's go through some of the questions and I try to go by order. I think we have the time. So first from David, he asked, what is considered in the 4% spent contributed in the upskilling by the government? And also is the data representing information provided by developed countries?
Good question. The 4% is basically the education expense, right? So it's the actually you can search it, the primary, secondary, and tertiary education. So directly what the government invests in maintaining the schools, basically. That's how we could approximate it. And I think it was OECD data, so probably not that much representing all the developed economies.
Okay. And maybe just to continue with David, since he already had two questions. He asked mostly in the course of the research, how are companies addressing their fear of reskilling employees, and they leave the company as a result of the skills gain?
Exactly. That's a really interesting point. And that's why one of the reasons we say actually the government needs to take a big stronger role in this whole reskilling business, because basically there are several market failures in here, such as the externalities that you just shown, that I invest in training my people and then they leave. And I think this is especially difficult if you talk about highly skilled employees. I think they leave anyway, kind of, but you still have to offer them training. So I think there's less of this mindset shift. But when it comes to you invest a year of training to a warehouse worker becoming a software developer and then they leave, I think that's definitely there. What we saw well is this is successful in companies who don't do reskilling because, they calculate every single penny on the return. But they say, this is how we develop people. This is what we believe in. For us, it is important. And it's just, nearly like a basic right for our employees that they have access to different careers and then they just do it. And I think Amazon is a good example in that regard. In that case, it works. But I think this is also a reason stopping a lot of companies to truly invest in it. Maybe one more thought, though. On the other hand, we do see some, the need is kind of driving it. We've seen some examples, like in Germany, in one of the industrial areas, they just didn't have enough engineers. So then 3 companies who normally are competitors, they teamed up, put the money together, did a training where they reskilled people, and then they split the result. Right. So actually, in some cases, companies are really desperate, and then you just can't even ask this question anymore. Yeah. And finally, some of my colleagues always say, what if we invest in people's training and they leave? And then the opposite question is, what if you don't invest and they stay?
Yeah, that's always a good question. I have still 2 more. One of them from Dapo. If you have a perspective on how corporations are collaborating with governments in approaching the skill value churn, especially in recent graduates, beyond internships and apprenticeships, you see any other innovation that is happening there?
So one really good example I'll tell you about it is it's called the Institutes of Technology in the UK, but it's just one example of basically what we see is the boundary between education and employment kind of becoming more blurry. And I think in the end, that's the way. So what happens in the UK is that in a certain area, like a district of London, you would have 2-3 colleges and the university and then 3-4 big employers who basically provide this 2-3 year education together. Which means if you are learning a certain technology, you are already learning it by going on the premises of a possible employer. The teachers are the future managers. The specific software you are using is the one the company will actually use. So basically merging education and employment. And in that, companies really have a huge role. And I think that's also shifting a bit, because previously as a company, as an employer, your role was I post my job and the graduate who possibly knows it applies. And now you have to extend your responsibility way beyond. I mean, Microsoft does trainings in kindergartens for girls to get them interested in technology so that they can hire software developers much, much later on. Basically, most companies are starting to look a bit beyond.
Okay, thanks. One question from Irina, tapping onto the topic of AI, which is a big one, of course. If you have any good examples on training programs for AI, especially in the volume upskilling outside of software engineering.
Yeah, well, you know what it is already. Makes sense. So I think, for AI, there's a lot of stuff out there nowadays. So I wouldn't be able to, name 1 or 2 that are better or worse. But I think one maybe interesting example is there is this school in France called 42, where it's basically founded by a French telco billionaire who realized that they don't have enough people with tech affinity to apply. And again, it's a very interesting program because it deconstructs what you need to know to really work in software. And I think they teach AI as well, but not sure if that's the focus. And basically, they take people who may not even have really touched the computer, and then in like a year and a half, they come out as functional software engineers. So I think with technology, what is interesting and what we see, you can really learn it now online very well. And, you can train yourself on AI or new technologies without any kind of institution needed at all. And that's still taking a bit of time for large employers to recognize. But for example, we heard of a client in China hiring 17-year-olds as senior software engineers because the kids have been doing that their whole life and that's their skill level. So I think to answer a question, I can't say a specific AI training program that I would recommend, but we just see a big shift in how people learn technology and how that should be perceived at the workplace.
No, that is an interesting perspective. Funny enough, to add on that topic, I've been working with a company that does code quality monitoring, so that it sees how good is the code quality. And naturally now with the rise of AI, what they see is that software engineers start to move from programmers to reviewers, or from creators to reviewers. And the more senior ones become more productive, but the more junior developer become more dangerous because they don't know how to assess the implications of everything that the code will execute for them. So one of those elements that they are looking at is how can you educate junior developers, how to use AI, how to prompt AI, because they are going to be using artificial intelligence more and more there. I think the other element is I think in your graph you show how fast the skills are going to change, especially how many people are going to be out of a job. Do you think there's an element that, if I look at Sam Altman, the OpenAI CEO says that we might hit general, AGI, artificial general intelligence, within the next 5 to 7 years, and if that happens, it will change the way that the world is positioned. In that case, do you think there will be a moment where we'll not have reskilling, but we'll just have a completely different view of the workforce?
Indeed, and I think that's where things should go eventually. But it will probably take a while until we get there. And we also talk about my clients often skill-based organizations, flexible workforce, where nobody has a job anymore. You just get people to do tasks, and it's all very nice. But I'm a little bit old-fashioned, as in how quickly this will change. And I work with HR departments now for 15 years, and we talk about the exact same things as we did 15 years ago, I would say. So it's changing a little fast because, jobs are also somehow the structure of society. You need a contract, you have your health insurance based on that, you have your pension based on that, etc. So I think while skills and the way you build skills are becoming an important aspect of kind of making decisions and building organizations, I don't think kind of the current building blocks of what a company is will completely dissolve.
Okay. One final practical question. You keep hearing reskilling and upskilling, and there's always a conversation that they are one and the same and different PR approaches, or they're actually different. Do you, in your own perspective, is it different upskilling and reskilling, or is just different wording for the same outcome?
So we actually use that pretty strictly defined also when we did the survey with the Harvard team. Upskilling is when you need to improve a set of your skills, but you stay within the same job. So upskilling, if I as a management consultant finally learn how to use my Slack, that would be a major upgrade. Reskilling is when you change to a different job. Like if I was now suddenly decided to be a doctor or whatever. But, sometimes there is a blur between, because if you reskill to an adjacent, very similar job, then it's nearly not that big of a change. While if your profession goes through a huge transformation, then it nearly feels like you've changed it. But generally, the definition is there an actual job change involved?
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Well, my sister-in-law went from being a financial controller to a software engineer in the last 2 years. So that was quite a transition to be made. So
that's a reskilling example, yes.
Yeah. But again, it comes from a place of pain, unhappiness with the current job, and then as you said, willingness to take a chance at changing the job, but also the ability to actually follow through. Because sometimes at our later age, let's say 30, 40s, 50s, it gets tougher and tougher to have the energy to make the switch, or at least you're going to have to do it, even if you don't want to.
Well, actually, that's where governments could help a little bit. So, we were studying also what are some good practices, and now it's becoming a little bit more popular, still not mainstream, but for governments to really support education leave. Like just an example, in Switzerland, every man below 35 has to go back to the military for 2 weeks a year. With the same effort, they could also have 1 week to develop skills or learn something. Because I think that's the other kind of mental challenge with this whole and upskilling is quite often say, oh, well, okay, here is the corporate training, here is Coursera, here is this, it's all free. Why are people not doing it? Well, because they are working a full-time job. So somehow also the way we structure life and work needs to find a bit more space for learning, even for people who are kind of past the traditional learning age.
And I don't see questions from the chat, but for the group, if you have comments, questions, stories, please keep sharing those. We are really wrapping up now, but if you don't have any question, I have one final one, which is a lot of the study was done, majority of the study was done with companies that are already at a certain large and size. They might be able to do large reskilling programs where maybe 5% of their workforce goes through a reskilling, and that doesn't really affect the short-term or long-term results, or at least the impact could be minimal. But how can small, medium companies, which might be 10 people, 20, 30, 40, 50, even at 100 people, they might not be able to afford to go to a reskilling program. They might be forced to, but they might not be able to have the financial investment or the ability to go through that. So did you look into those companies and how they can address those reskilling?
I think that's a great question, and it's one of the major blockers also of this transformation, because if, of course, you can barely stay afloat, then you can't invest in people developing their careers and lives. I think so first of all, again, that's where government would step in, but that's where also we've seen examples of large companies playing a central role. It's called the Queen Bee program in Singapore, for example, where large employer actually invests to the employees of their suppliers to upskill. And then those are much smaller employers and SMEs. So that is one way that kind of the impact trickles down. But then what smaller companies maybe can do better is that they may more have the time to really think of what kind of people they are hiring. And they may be able to be more open. They don't have regulations. They don't have recruiters who work on a quota. They actually can be a little bit more flexible of where that person should be, what background they come from. And they can really hire more people as people and less as a kind of a result of a process. So maybe they already will have a more diverse workforce to begin with.
Thanks. And we're going to go with one last question, and then we wrap up and close so we can stay on time to the logic. So with that, a final one, and perspectives on change deterrence across corporations. Yeah, the stats show the willingness to change. Are there any other barriers that you observed beyond, for example, the work-life balance and other elements?
I think it's kind of a macro factor, but generally companies are still on a journey to think of people as assets and not as cost. And that kind of trickles through to everything related to HR. The HR IT system is the last one that gets an upgrade. The people analytics usually is just the one guy does it 10% of their time. Meanwhile, you have a department of 20 doing your financial analytics. So it's kind of quite often investment in people as assets is not quite there yet. Training, if we actually did another study, we looked at annual reports of 80 large companies, and nearly all of them talk about training as a cost. So they report on the learning expenses, but they don't report on the outcome, the people reskill, the productivity growth, etc. They don't even know how to measure it. So I think that's kind of an underlying issue, is that when it comes to human resource, companies are much less mature in managing it than any other resource.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to wrap up the leadership point of view. Orska, thanks for being the first guest. And if people want to find out more, how can they reach or be more informed? What will you say?
Just drop me an email. Yeah, anytime.
Okay. So it might be good afterwards I will share what is the email address, and also I guess they can reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, feel free to share. And also I can share some of the studies that we wrote on this Worth a Read.
Okay, thanks. And for everyone else, thanks for attending. And we're going to continue these sessions in a few weeks from now with very exciting topics. Thanks.
Thanks for having me, Hugo.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.